Who hates Iowa? Those nerds up north hate Iowa. Iowa, a dominating victory against the Gophers tonight in women's hoops. We break it down in Instant Reaction Podcast, plus a good night for the Iowa men, even when they didn't play. We break it all today down on Locked On Hawkeyes.
You are Locked On Hawkeyes, your daily podcast on the Iowa Hawkeyes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, welcome in. I'm Trent Condon, and this is the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Thanks for making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. We're available wherever you find podcasts, and you can also find us on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button while you're there. It helps us get in front of more Hawkeye fans. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers join today. You'll get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to get started. What a fun night of basketball as everything was clicking up in the barn. The GOAT gets it done. Caitlyn Clark setting new records and continuing an incredible senior campaign. We talk a little bit about that. Well, a lot about the women's basketball game and now what's in front of them with the matchup against Ohio State, though it won't be for a regular season crown, as Michigan couldn't pull off the upset tonight against the Buckeyes. It's still going to be an incredible environment coming up on Sunday. But before that, a look back, Instant Reaction Podcast, and we'll talk some men's hoops a little bit later on in the program today, as the men had a good night and a night where they didn't even have to take the hardwood, coming off the win on Tuesday evening against Penn State. Well, let's get into it here and open up early. You saw Caitlyn, she had things cooking. We go back to when she broke the NCAA scoring record against Michigan, hits the logo 3, the new logo that is now on the floor, showing the spot that she hit that. And remember, in that game, it happened very quickly. She came out on fire. She was firing, and she was knocking down shots. And we see the same thing in this one as she goes off early in the game. She is doing basically whatever she wants, getting to her spots, knocking down shots, getting to the rim, and gets off to a hot start. It's another triple-double for her. It's just old hat. The day after Peyton Sandford has the first triple-double in men's basketball program history, Caitlyn Clark does it for the 17th time in her career. Just absolutely ridiculous what we get to see each and every time. And really, never gave Minnesota a shot in this game. There was never a sweat in this basketball game. The great news, though, is though Caitlyn Clark will dominate the headlines and Caitlyn Clark will get all the highlights on SportsCenter. And we're going to hear more and more about Caitlyn and more ridiculous numbers. And in fact, we got some for you coming up here on the program. However, what is the big takeaway from this basketball game is not that. The takeaway from this game is that the supporting class played incredibly well. So we looked through and some of the things that we were looking for. Number one, the biggest concern about this team as we flip the calendar to March was Gabbie Marshall. And we've talked a lot about Gabbie going back to the loss last week against Indiana, even in the victory with Illinois, which was another get-right game. And seemingly everybody played well out of the regulars and even deeper into the rotation. The one player that did not, at least offensively, was Gabbie Marshall. We've talked about the defensive metrics, not as high as maybe you'd anticipate. And more than anything, though, not only was Gabbie Marshall not hitting shots from the outside, her aggressiveness was gone. You go back to a year ago, and she had a prolonged shooting slump a season ago. But you rarely saw a time, even during that slump, even when it was at its worst, where Gabbie Marshall was hesitant to shoot. She was going to shoot herself out of it. We saw that go away against Indiana, but was a little bit more aggressive against Illinois. But finally, it clicked tonight. And it's uber important. It just is. To think that Lisa Blutter is going to take a super senior that has been a starter for you now for a number of years, that has started, almost 130 games in her collegiate career at the University of Iowa, and suddenly is going to put her on the bench, it was unlikely. As we've talked in the past, the clutch minutes down the stretch, we've seen Gabbie Marshall at times not be a part of that. But because of what she means to the squad and the familiar nature, knowing where she's going to be, and that ability to knock down a three-pointer from the outside, they're going to need her. Again, if I was going to make a run, this could not just be the Caitlin Clark show. The supporting cast needs to step up. It's what happened a year ago. We knew Monica Sonano was going to be outstanding, and she was. We knew what you were going to get from Warnock, but it went deeper, and it was Martin, and it was Marshall, and it was Hannah Stolke helping out on the bench. And everybody has to do their part. Because just as easily as Iowa can make another run to the Final Four, this thing can also end in the round of 32. We saw it 2 years ago against Creighton. We nearly saw it a year ago against Georgia. Yes, the team that went to the championship game nearly lost at home to Georgia in the second round. This is not the old days of women's college basketball, where there are a couple of programs and they're going to dominate and coast their way in if you're one of the top programs into the Elite Eight before you see a difficult opponent. That's not the case anymore. There are too many good players, too many good teams out there to think that's going to happen. And that's because, and that's the reason that it's so important for the supporting cast to continue to step up. Now, they did it against a dreadful Minnesota team. They're incredibly young. They're not good. They're 11th right now in the Big Ten. They're going to be playing likely in the play-in part of the tournament just to get into, I guess, the first round. I mean, it's not a good team, and you don't want to overrate what you saw, but there's so many positives. Mention Gabbie. 4-7 from three. That was great. But also a cut to the rim. Great pass by Caitlin Clark finding her there, but being also more than just a shooter. When that shot's going down, that's going to open up more things for her as a cutter and being able to finish around the rim. She was able to do that here tonight. Molly Davis, again, struggled as most everybody did against Indiana. 5 for 5 from the floor, knocked down a three-pointer, 5 assists in the game, 4 rebounds. She was outstanding. And a day where Kate Martin didn't play incredibly well offensively, she still chipped in with 5 rebounds and 4 assists and helping the team in other ways. The same thing with Hannah Stolke. Didn't play a ton of minutes, at least what we're used to for Stolke in the game. She just played 6. But the good news is another question that we have about this squad. Kylie Fuerbach hadn't hit a three-pointer since the Wisconsin game before Sunday. She goes out there and knocks down a bunch of threes against the Illini and then carried it over and hits 4 more three-pointers in this one. We know Fuerbach can be a good offensive player. I think she has athleticism that is good on the defensive end, and she can help on that side of the floor. We're not looking for Kylie Fuerbach to go out there and play 28 minutes a game. But if she can give you a solid 12, 15, knock down shots as she's done now the last couple of games, you have something there because she's another perimeter defender that you can throw out there and cause some problems for the other team. Taylor McCabe. I've been saying it since November. I want to see more Taylor McCabe. We got to see it. Mentioned it again after the Indiana game. I still think, and especially if what we saw tonight from Gabbie Marshall doesn't continue, that McCabe needs to be one of those players that can definitely help stretch the defense. Molly Davis could hit a three-point shot. She's not what you'd consider a three-point shooter. Size, doesn't have the quickest release, those kind of things. I think that's something that you'd be looking at. Cynthia Fulter she's just a stud. Rebounding, working in traffic, 9 rebounds in the game, 3 assists. She chips in with 6 points. But what other angle? And this was a bit of a surprise. And it's interesting, as we saw Addison O'Grady come in, didn't shoot it real well, but she was working hard. She was rebounding well. We want it to work for her because there's going to be those matchups that it's going to be important. However, AJ Edinger comes in, and that was a surprise. And AJ, she made a couple of plays. Remember, she was one of the more highly regarded recruits that Iowa's got here over the last half decade at the University of Iowa. And when she's been in, and the spurts have been even less than we've seen Sharon Goodman, of course, O'Grady this year, when she's been in there, she's been able to do a couple of things. Again, it might be matchup dependent, but that was something good to see. And after the comments last week from Lisa Blutter, when she talked about her post players and the frustrations that she has with their inconsistency, that was something very, very good. Great night to be a Hawkeye, and always great to stick it to the Gophers. 108-60 the final in that one. We're going to take a peek forward as we continue. Sunday should be an epic one. Maybe one of the most anticipated events in Carver Hawkeye Arena history. I don't think I'm being hyperbolic. This is going to be up there. Potentially the last regular season game for Caitlyn Clark. We'll talk about that, plus a great night for men's basketball. As all as we continue here, this is the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Today's episode of Locked On Hawkeyes is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience, what brings home the winning trophy, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. That's ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Trent Condon back with you here on the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Thanks for making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day, your team every day. That's what we do here across the Locked On network, not just Locked On Hawkeyes, college side, Locked On Big Ten. Craig doing great work over there on that front. A lot of football content, spring football around the corner. He is doing that. And of course, all the basketball that is happening right now. Your favorite NFL, MLB, NBA, NHL team, we have you covered here on the Locked On Network. Let's get back into the Hawkeyes and take a look now at what we have to look forward to this weekend. You know, Caitlyn Clark becomes a foregone conclusion as we're talking about the game and what she was able to do. I also had to mention becoming the all-time leading scorer in major women's college basketball history. Yes, against the Michigan game, she set the NCAA record, and it was amazing in the build-up for that, but set a record that I have argued now for the last couple of weeks as this has become closer and closer to it actually happening, is more important. And that's Lynette Woodard, who played at Kansas. And she played before the NCAA was officially sanctioned women's athletics, but put up the points in a different era. Elisa Blutter, after the matchup tonight, had this to say, quote, "Tonight is the night of the real record. We played basketball back then. They just don't want to recognize it. That hurts the rest of us that were playing at that time," unquote. A strong words there from Coach Blutter, and something that I guess I've been a little bit surprised about, this goofy nature of trying to equate Pistol Pete and Caitlyn Clark as the all-time scoring mark. I don't understand why we have to put these two sports together. They're different sports. When we talk about home run records in softball and baseball, we don't put them together. And it doesn't matter if it's collegiate or something else. We don't do that. Why in basketball? And this seemingly the only sport that this happens, that we have to put them together or match them up. Does it lead to more interest? I don't think so. But they lead to unfair comparisons. They lead to arguments that don't need to be there. Frankly, it's short-sighted. They're different sports. Ultimately, if there is a men's player that runs down Pistol Pete's record, that's a different conversation. If there's a men's player that eventually passes Caitlyn Clark and wherever her career ends up in terms of points scored, it doesn't diminish Caitlyn Clark. It doesn't take it away, but they're different sports. It's something that is incredibly difficult for me to wrap my mind around. And we have tennis, men's and women's tennis programs, men's and women's soccer programs. And do we put them together when we're talking about it at the collegiate level? But for some reason, people want to do it in basketball. I don't get it. This is something that should have been bigger tonight. I completely agree with Coach Blutter. I thought there should have been more buildup to what it was. I know when she eventually passes Pistol Pete, it'll be a big deal for some people. It's not for me. They're different sports. This isn't misogynistic. I love women's athletics. I've loved Iowa women's basketball for a very long time. I'm not some Johnny come lately jumping on here. And anybody that knows me and understands me and how I celebrate women's sports and women's athletics knows that. It just strikes me as odd. That aside, let's get back into it and look forward to which will be an amazing day against Ohio State. College game day. ESPN will be there. Step number one for a Fox broadcast. That's right. This game will be on Big Fox. Gus will be on the call. Gus Johnson will be there. And it'll be emotional because outside of Caitlin Clark and just the awe inspiring, the jaw dropping plays that she makes in the black and gold, when you go to a game at Carver, there is a certain level of love that you hear for Gabbie Marshall that short of Caitlyn is unmatched. Everybody is rooting for Gabbie Marshall. Everybody is rooting for her to figure out the shooting every time. You saw it a year ago, and it felt like, just the fan base almost pleading with her to get those shots down when she was going through the slump. And the same thing this year. There's so much goodwill. And I think you're going to see a lot of emotion before the game against the Buckeyes. Remember, you go back. You see Ohio State ranked number 2 in the country. They've wrapped up the regular season crown. They're going to win it outright. They'll be the number 1 seed in the Big Ten tournament. Iowa had them beat handily. They led that game by double digits. Now, Cody, she made plays down the stretch, and she was incredible down the stretch. And credit to her in Ohio State. But more than anything, that was Iowa kind of blowing the game. It's just us talking here, us Hawkeye fans, right? We can be honest about this. Yeah, she made some plays down the stretch, but more than anything, I will let them back in it. Caitlyn said after that game, they knew they were going to get a rematch and they're going to be ready. There's no doubt. I saw Chad Leistikow at the Des Moines Register. He had a tweet up kind of equating what we saw a year ago to what we saw here. Coming on the heels of a blowout loss. They had one last year at Maryland, late in the season, late against Indiana this season. Come back, get the chance against a highly ranked team in the regular season finale. Now, that one ended with fireworks with the walk-off buzzer-beating three-pointer by Caitlin Clark to win it and send Iowa and really build the momentum going into the Big Ten tournament. Let's hope we don't need a buzzer beater to do it. I'll tell you what, when I see that FanDuel come out for Iowa, the Iowa-Ohio State game, on Sunday morning, if I was laying 3, 4, even 5 points, I'm going to lay it with confidence. I think this is going to be an eye-opening experience for the Buckeyes. Let's just say that. And certainly they have not played in an environment like they're going to see on Sunday. But it's not about Kate Martin and Gabbie Marshall at the same level it's going to be for Caitlin Clark. And I know there's dissenting views out there. There are people, my wife included, who believe that Caitlin Clark's going to come back for another season in the black and gold, and didn't want to get in that argument with the wife, so we just let that one, we talked about it a little bit, but let that one slide. And I know there's plenty of people out there that believe it. Now, I don't think it's a financial aspect. The finances are going to be there. It's not like all the people that are giving her sponsorship dollars are going to suddenly dry up as she goes to the WNBA. She's a transformative player. She is a player unlike anything that we've seen in women's basketball. And she is going to have those people watching her wherever level that she's playing at. But after 4 years, the accomplishments that she's had, I just think she's ready. She's ready for the next step. Could something happen here or the final few games? An early exit of the NCAA tournament? Maybe Iowa with the right NIL dollars, not only making it happen for her, but also building a team that they would need to compete again next season. It's possible. I just don't think it's very plausible. And when you look at all the factors that are pointing to her being out there, she's going through the ceremonies as a senior. The likelihood is this is going to be the last regular season game that we'll see for Caitlin Clark at Carver Hawkeye Arena. What a frenzied environment it's going to be as we've continued to see the secondary market in terms of ticket prices are absolutely through the roof. Make sure you download the Game Time app, by the way. If taking a look at those secondary market prices for some tickets because Game Time can definitely help you out with that. But that aside, the environment's going to be amazing. I think the game's going to be great. This team is clicking again. They figured things out. Caitlyn would talked about even the triple-double she had against Illinois. She still looked a little bit tired. That wasn't the case tonight, was it? There was no tired legs out there in the barn. Speaking of that, one of the best of the many signs that I saw said we came to the barn to watch the goat. That was a good one. We retweeted that on the Locked On Hawkeyes account on Twitter. But a lot of good things there. And with it, it's going to be amazing. It really is. So Caitlyn Clark, triple-double. Great. Hitting threes from all over the place. She was great. Also tonight, her 17th career triple-double. She sets the single-season three-point record, most three-pointers made in a season. She also becomes the all-time leader in three-pointers made in the Big Ten. And with all that, it was about her teammates. She has 12 assists in the game. Gabbie gets going. Fuerbach gets going. We saw a little something out of Edinger. We have all these different things. Senior Day is going to be incredible. I'm looking so forward. Hey, congratulations as well to Gabbie Marshall going also over 1,000 career points in the game. A lot to be excited about for women's basketball. And we're getting there for the men's team too. That's right. A great night for men's basketball. They get the win the previous night against Penn State, and now bubble-licious. Iowa's starting to get maybe closer and closer to an NCAA tournament bid. Still a lot to do. We'll talk about the night. What's ahead for the Hawkeyes as we look forward to the weekend and the road trip to Northwestern. We'll do that as we continue. This is Locked On Hawkeyes. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel. It's America's #1 sports book. Right now, new customers, how about this? You can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. $150 if your bet wins. That sounds incredible, and it is with FanDuel Sportsbook. Bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with FanDuel, including quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and a whole lot more. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. Once again, that is FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Trent Condon back with you one more time here on Locked On Hawkeyes. Hey, hit that subscribe button while you're here. Greatly appreciate it if you're on YouTube. If you're on the podcast side, 5 stars, that's what we're looking for. Helps us get in front of more Hawkeye fans. And always love to hear your comments and see your comments over on YouTube. Help us out there or follow along on Twitter at Trent Condon or at Locked On Iowa. So I mentioned the men's team had a great night. Well, Trent, they didn't play. That's okay. Because Iowa's resume is not in a vacuum, right? You need some help. Now, Minnesota didn't get the win against Illinois. It was not likely that that was going to happen in Champaign anyway to get back into the top 75 and add another quad one victory to Iowa's resume with the road victory they have against Minnesota. Still can happen. But speaking of that note, as we see a team just on the fringe. So, guy that I've followed for a number of years in the college basketball space is Eric Haslam. He's got a website, Haslam Metrics. That's where you can find him on Twitter, and he's got his own website, and it's analytical. We talk about Bort Torvik, and we talk about Ken Pomeroy, and this is a different one, and his numbers are a little bit different. Now, don't hold it against him. Yes, he's a Wisconsin guy, but outside of that, Eric does a really good job, and it's just another one of the many tools that I like to use throughout the course of the college basketball season to find out a little bit more. Now, I use it a lot for my gambling purposes that I do, and some of the things that I put together. See if there's some outliers, see if there's some different numbers that can help get to a pick of my games. And throughout the last couple of years, been pretty good in college basketball overall. But that aside, Eric Haslam said this just yesterday on Twitter. So Iowa's the second team outside the NCAA tournament field in my bracketology. Deserves this morning and wondered why they're not in play for more bracketologists. So he has that. Bracketology deserves, not what the committee is going to do, just talking about the teams that are most deserving to get there. We had a couple of comments on YouTube talking just about this and talking about how difficult and the difficult nature of this schedule. And non-conference, obviously, what they did going out, playing Creighton in the Gabbie games, having the matchups against Oklahoma and against Seton Hall, getting the win there, of course, playing Iowa State. But then also, and more importantly, in the Big Ten, you got double plays against Wisconsin, against Illinois, against Purdue. When you're talking about kind of the rest of the teams in the conference, how many of those teams have played 6 games against the best teams in the conference, at least as it pertains to the way that they set up right now? Not many of them. That is for sure. As he said, Eric Haslam here as we continue with what he had to say. As some of you know, the deserves are an exception to the norm. They're not necessarily attempting to predict the committee's actions, as I just said. Instead, they're attempting to determine the most worthy teams based on the criteria the committee has deemed important. What he gets into, though, and digging a little bit deeper, is not the net, but the net that he uses and the analytics that he uses in order to get the top team. So all of a sudden, Iowa with the 2-8 record against quad one, well, the metrics that he uses, Iowa looks a whole lot better. And those three opponents, the game against Nebraska, Seton Hall, and Minnesota. Nebraska is 41st as of yesterday morning in the net. They're 29th in his metrics. Because of that, the victory that they have would be a quad one victory against the Huskers earlier this season. Same thing with Seton Hall. They're not in the top 50 of the net. That means it's not a quad one victory. It is a quad two win on a neutral floor. In his metrics, though, they're 47th. And then finally, Minnesota, we mentioned, they're 77th in the net. They're 71st in his metrics. If Iowa did have a 5-8 record right now against quad one, we'd be having a different conversation. I believe they would be solidly in the tournament, and you're not changing anything. You're not changing the quality of those teams, but we have these hard and fast rules. And how different is the team ranked 75th as opposed to the team ranked 76th? In the grand scheme of things, it's nothing. But because they have that hard and fast rule, is there something that can be done to look at a resume and dive even deeper than just those strict cutoffs? Top 30 victory for a team on the road, at home, excuse me. Top 50 for a neutral. Top 75 for a win on the road. Well, if you got 3 wins, teams ranked 76 through 80, as opposed to a team that has 1 win against a team ranked 75th, what would you rather have? I think it's pretty simple. You'd rather have those 3 road wins, but not the way that it's set up, at least in the quadrant system, which is a big part of the NCAA tournament resume. Very interesting there. Mentioned it's a good night for Iowa basketball, though. And Texas A&M, Ole Miss, Butler, all bubble teams, they go down. We saw Providence the night before. They've also gone down. As I said, it's not in a vacuum. It's not just about Iowa. It's what's happening around them. Now, if we get to conference tournament time and there's a bunch of bid stealers and we see San Francisco win the WCC, well, St. Mary's is already going to be there. If we see a bunch of Mountain West teams that do the right thing, we see some other bubble teams that bounce up. We see, I don't know, a team from out of nowhere winning the Big East Conference tournament, and suddenly they're in the NCAA bracket. Remember the year that Georgia, about a decade back when there was tornadoes down in Atlanta, and they ended up winning the SEC tournament? Ended up being a 14 seed of that season, getting in after a terrible year for the Bulldogs. Those kind of things can happen, and eventually what that does is it shrinks the bubble a little bit more. But again, it's about Iowa. In Iowa, the most realistic path that they have is winning the next 2 games to finish out the regular season. It is not easy going to Northwestern, a team that has not lost to a Big Ten team this season inside their own building, and then wrapping things up, of course, against that talented Illinois team. The path, though, is there. And speaking of path, one final thing for you here on the basketball front. So, was playing around at the website I mentioned yesterday, bball.notnothing.net. And as we're playing around, the most realistic scenarios is Iowa's going to be either in the 7-10 game or the 8-9 game. Now, you want to be on the bottom side of the bracket. And if you do that, that means winning at minimum one of these 2 games. And if you do that in the 7-10 game, you could be playing Illinois. You could be playing Nebraska. And in fact, there is a potential path where Iowa would have to go through, get this, an opening game against Ohio State. Feel confident about that on a neutral, even as bad as last year's game went against the Buckeyes in the Big Ten tournament. Then you would play Nebraska. Then you would potentially play Northwestern. That's to get to the championship. Hey, if the bracket plays out like that, you can't ask for anything more. Peyton Sanford playing at a high level. Josh Dix has continued to ascend his game. They're getting enough inside. It's there. The chance is there. And if we get the win against Northwestern this weekend, look out. The hype train, it's going to be in the red. Thanks for making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. We're with you each and every day throughout the course of the week. Your team every day. That's what we do here on the Locked On Network. Speaking of the Locked On Network, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. We'll be back with you tomorrow as we will set the scene for the weekend. It is a busy one. Iowa baseball also with the big series as they go down and take on SEC foe Ole Miss. We'll talk about that. We'll talk some hoops. We'll talk some football. We got you covered with the Hawkeyes, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. We'll talk to you again tomorrow. Go Hawks.